All right, so I get the fun part today of talking about where we've been and all the great work that's been done, and then where we're headed next. And then Michelle Irons will take over and talk to you a little bit more about what we're actually going to do today. So happy to be here and hope everybody had a nice long weekend. I'm just excited to be here in Duanesburg when it's not snowing, because usually it's a snow day when I show up. So with that in mind, here's the big idea, the big agenda for today. Like I said, we're going to go over what we've already done. We're going to talk about the unit writing, and we have some rubrics that were developed by some folks at Capital Region BOCES that you're going to be able to use to look at units. And while the focus has kind of been ELA and math in terms of the unit writing that the smaller groups have done, our hope is that you can take these unit rubrics and use them in your discipline. So use it as a lens to look at whatever you have. And because I know that's been a big focus of this, to make sure that we've got kind of everybody on the same page with the tools and what people are using and the common experiences, but still working on your own content, because it only makes sense to work on your own stuff. And then you're going to work on writing learning targets, and Michelle's going to talk about that in a few minutes and tell you kind of what we're thinking with that. So just to go back in time a little bit here and to review the work we've done, if you remember, a lot of this work was based on a partnership that several BOCES have gotten together and worked together to share resources and share expertise and develop materials. And what's really cool about this is the work that you have done here and that we've all done together is work that we've shared across the state, and it's on our website, so all the tools that folks in other districts and BOCES can use. And I'm here to tell you, I've been all over the state doing this work and spreading this around, and you're so far ahead of the game, it's unbelievable. We show people the resources and the things that you've used here, and they're just like, whoa, this is all free? And the answer is yes, because that was the whole idea of this partnership, was to give people the resources to do this work across the state. So you should feel really good about the fact that you're out there ahead of the rest of the state in many cases. So we are recording this today. That's what this little robot here is following me around, because we're going to share this with the other districts in the county who couldn't be here today. So that's the idea. And just to remind you, again, we're in the second phase of the rollout of the next generation math and ELA standards, with the idea of getting to spring of 2021, where the new 3 through 8 assessments are aligned with those new standards. So, but again, that's just one piece of this. I think that kind of spurred this work, but really, I think we've been able to give folks the opportunity to work in your own discipline so that you can continue to move your curriculum forward. All right, so just as a reminder, this is our model that we've been using, and I always tell people, you had this on a piece of paper, I think the last time we were together, and I always tell people that a curriculum model, it's not perfect, but the good model that you use and follow is better than the perfect one that you don't. It's kind of like a diet, right? So this was the model that we decided on, and just to break it down so you can see it a little bit better, the idea was, how do we get from standards all the way to some sort of curriculum or core instructional program guide, whatever you want to call it. Different people call it different things. How do you get there? And that's the case for any curriculum, any discipline. Phys Ed has new standards out there for comment, so they'll follow a similar process from getting from curriculum all the way to standards. And we've talked throughout this process about how it didn't go so hot last time with the Common Core rollout, and what we've tried to do this time with your help. And this is what's been great about this, because as we've worked with you, I taught high school math, and you're kind of like the first period class. You know, the second period class gets a little bit better of a lesson, right? Because I'm just working through it. So it's been great to have you working through this, because not only has it, I think, been good for you as a system and as a group, but also it's helped us refine this work as we share it with other folks across the state. So the idea was trusting teachers to do their jobs. Imagine that, right? So instead of handing people scripted curriculum the way it went last time for a lot of places, our thinking around this process, and your superintendents were all on board with this, in fact, they were driving this work, is to trust teachers to do their job. So when we looked at that process, we knew we needed to really pay attention to the standards in a deep way. So that's what we did. If you think back to last fall, you worked on deconstructing standards or unpacking standards, or whatever you want to call it, but really getting to know standards in a deeper and better way. And it wasn't just in ELA and math. Every discipline did that following a similar process. Then from there, we worked on prioritizing standards, and that our snow day got in the way a little bit with that, but I know that work went on in different ways in different districts, so prioritizing standards. And again, yes, focus on ELA and math, but that's work that works in any discipline. And now we're at the point of really thinking about units. And we talked about teaching points last time. So this is really just the next step in that process. And I give you a lot of credit because your districts have committed to this work over the course of the last year. And like I said, you're in a great spot when it comes to getting from standards to curriculum. So we've tried to make this teacher-centered, teacher-led. The last fall, if you remember, we had facilitators that we worked with and helped train to facilitate the work that you did in smaller groups. Today, it's going to be really, you're kind of on your own. We're going to show you the resources and provide you with those, and then really you're going to work together and just move the work forward and go to the next step, whatever makes sense in your particular area. And Michelle's going to talk about that in a few minutes. And I like to think that we've increased the capacity in the region for sure, between the folks that worked as facilitators, you working together, people who did curriculum writing over the summer. Who participated in that? We had a few people. Yep, definitely. And so that's work where we've increased the capacity of what's going on. And also this idea of shared experiences, which is different from the way most rollouts have gone in the past. So if you think about the way things typically go, it's here's the stuff, go do it, versus participating in the process and having a set of common experiences. So we had the superintendent's conference days like this, where everybody engages in the same kind of work in your own area. Then folks go off and do the work. You saw the folks who raised their hands. They go off and do some more of the deeper work. Then we come back together for something else, another common experience related to that work and the work moving forward, so that more work can continue. So getting from here to there, the three areas that we really focused on so far were deconstructing standards, that is getting to know them better, prioritizing them, and we used a way of thinking about that from Larry Ainsworth about that work, and then developing the teaching points. So what does the teacher do in order to get students to demonstrate that they've mastered the standards? So this is where we are right now. Now we're in this stage of creating units. And the idea is that we will have this done. Our target to have it done is the end of December. And we're hopeful. We think that we can do that. We're in the process of setting up days where teachers can come together regionally to keep moving that forward. And again, that's for ELA and math, 3 through 8. And like I said, you're leading the state. So these are the math units by grade level that have been completed so far. And this is a ton of work that got done. And I think it's important to recognize that you've done this together. Yes, you had representatives go off and do it, but you've all participated in this work at some level throughout this process over the course of the last year. Which again, like I said, I feel like I can't say it enough times. This is not going on in other places where people are paying this close attention to getting from standards all the way to curriculum. Here's our next step. So here we are. The superintendents are going to meet on the 28th to kind of review the work that's happened so far this fall and think about where to go next. Like I said, by the end of December, we'll have the units done after folks work regionally. And then after December 31st. Now again, we've tried to make sure that it isn't all about just math and ELA. So in thinking about what the next steps would be that will support that work in math and ELA, but also support every other discipline, the idea is that beyond the end of this calendar year and into the spring, we're going to kind of shift the focus a little bit from writing units, because they'll be done, to thinking about mini units, thinking about special education, English language learners, specially designed instruction, and really crafting some experiences around those concepts that will help everybody and that will also help with math and ELA. And then you see again the tests are aligned to the standards in spring of 2021, and there we are. So, remember this way back? So these are my children. We talked about standards. There's the basement. Don't want them living there. Remember that? That's why standards are important. Okay? We talked about the drive. We did the driving example. It kills her that I show that. In fact, I have to get back this afternoon. She has her senior swim meet. So we did that deconstructing work. We talked about what standards, when we deconstructed them. Is this ringing a bell? Just kind of, yep, dusting it off a little bit. Talk about the train tracks. We use that as a metaphor for it. That idea of identifying priority standards, because there's so many standards, everything can't be equally important. So, and that works. That's important for all disciplines to really focus on that. And what this does too, when you are able to identify priority standards and then in turn prioritize the curriculum, it helps the folks who are working with students with disabilities and English language learners really focus in on the most important things. Because if you have kids, you know this, if you have kids who are behind, you can't focus on everything all at once and expect them to close that gap. You really have to laser focus in on what's the most important standards and concepts. So we did that work, prioritizing standards. These are the questions that we use to think about it. And this is important because, like we said before, we wanted folks to have common experiences related to this so that everybody understands what it means to prioritize standards. Can you still hear me in the back with the fan on? Okay. And because the last thing you want is somebody to say, oh, well, you know, how'd these get prioritized? Why is it this and not that? So the idea was that we make sure that everybody understands what goes into this process. And yeah, you can see there, assessment is a piece of it. We definitely, and they're all numbered 1. That's interesting because they're all really important. But you notice assessment's in there. So we used, folks, when they prioritize standards, use data to look at what's heavily tested on the assessments as one of the criteria to determine whether or not a standard is a priority standard. We looked at things like, is this a standard that students mastering the standard will help them in the next course? Is it something that endures later beyond school? So those were the criteria that we used to help people get through that idea of prioritizing standards. And now I'm going to turn it over to Michelle.
So I'm Michelle Irons, and okay, thank you. I'm Michelle Irons, and I have had the wonderful pleasure to work with many of you, and I just wanted to start out by saying that as we move forward, all of you that I have worked with are such wonderful and thoughtful educators, and I appreciate the fact that you come here. I have sat in your seats, and I know that the number one thing that you never have enough of is time, right? So never enough time. And all of this sounds wonderful, but in your head you're thinking, oh, I have to get through this week first, right? That's, because I live that life too. So we want to make sure that Mike and I, in our presentation this morning, we wanted to give you the tools that you're going to need today and then give you the time that you need to work together and move forward and have some really good work time today. So this summer, after you guys all left this summer, you know that there were groups that came together and they worked on building those units. So the first thing they did with those priority and supporting standards that you worked on last year is they sequenced them. They put them in, they kind of put them in an order so that it made sense. This is what many of your subject areas, that is a natural order, but some of them, it depends, right? So I'm sure if you are not an ELA or math teacher that didn't work on those units this summer in social studies and science and the arts and business, all of you have that same process. So this is what a sequence looks like. When you go off today and you get to look into you'll have a folder that you look into so you can actually see the work that was done this summer. you'll see sequence charts like this. This is an example. Notice it kind of looks like something you would create for pacing, right? So it gives you your standards and your foundational skills. This is obviously related to ELA. And this is what they did this summer. That's the first thing they did with those priority standards. Then they had this lovely template. It keeps everything together and very standardized so that no matter who looks at it, they understand it, right? And that's important too. Today, when you go off, if you are a social studies or a science teacher, or you teach something other than ELA and math, within the folder that you see today, there are templates for your specific subject areas. We're asking that you look at those, not that you are, oh my God, I'm using this, but we want you to look at it and see, is this something that I could tweak to help me with my curriculum? Or is this something that I already have and I'm kind of on the right track? But is this something that could help me make my curriculum even better? Notice they put the standards in right away. That's where they started. And by doing that, they were able to then focus on teaching points. Teaching points are the things, what do you want to teach your students? What will you do in your classroom? This is more teacher-centered and teacher-focused. And the importance of these are that they're directly related to the standards. So they took those standards, they looked at them, and they said, for this unit, what will I do with my students? This is an example of the rubric Mike was talking about earlier. The rubric that was created is kind of a guide, not just for you to use to reflect and assess, but also in the building of the units. Each section of that template has its own section of the rubric. That will also be in your folder today. This is the section for teaching points. So as they were writing their teaching points, they were able to use this to say, okay, notice the goal section. They were making sure they were hitting all of those points as they were developing and creating their teaching points. Now, obviously, this is a process, so it took a while. This is so lovely to click on this every 30 seconds and be like, well, but in reality, this was something that our teachers spent a lot of time on, really being thoughtful about what am I going to do in my classroom to meet these standards? What am I going to do with my kids to really ensure that they're getting what they need? This is another example of one of the sections. This is just for the standard section, just so you could see a few different parts. You'll be able to see the whole thing a little later and on your own when you go back and you work in your groups. The idea behind this is when the units are done, there will be a committee of people that will go through the units, and they will use that rubric again to really look and see, are there sections that we still need to improve upon and do work upon? So that's why we want the rubrics to guide you in your curriculum building, but also we're going to use it as a tool to make sure that our finished product is really representative of what it needs to be. Okay, so this is my fun part. After those templates and the unit building, they worked on the teaching points. There are a lot more sections. You will see when you go through the work that they did a ton. There's an assessment section. There are, I could list them all, but you will see them on your own. We didn't want to go through every one because that would take a really long time, so we're going to let you explore those on your own. But in the next step, we're going to talk about this up here. I'm sure you're reading that. Are you all trying to find it? Yeah, while I'm talking? Perfect. Mm-hmm. Does anybody see it? Oh, you do? Oh, smarty pants. Okay. Okay, so what if I block out part of the picture? Does that help you identify the target now? Remember, we're looking for a star. Anybody else see it now? A couple? Okay. What about now? How many people? Is there anybody that doesn't see it yet? All right, I'm going to give you a second more. Keep looking. You're looking for a star. There it is. Were you ready? Yeah. Why am I showing you this? What do you think this has to do with teaching or your teaching? I use that target word in there. Don't worry, I don't expect you to answer me. I get it. So how does this relate to your student learning? In our minds, we're experts in our field, right? You're an expert at what you teach. You know exactly what you want to get across to your students. It's very clear in your mind. No matter what you are, what content, what subject you're teaching, that's all very clear to you. And you give that presentation, you do that activity, you give that, that knowledge to your kids, and all of a sudden you're like, they did not get that at all. That is not what, how many times has that happened, right? So for us, it's very clear in our minds, but it's not always clear for our kids. So this is really important. Learning targets are really important because in reality, because it's clear to us doesn't mean it's clear to our students. We need to give them that end goal. We need to give them more direction. What do they need to get out of what we're doing? What should they be learning? What should they be able to do at the end of our time together? That's what's really important for our kids to understand. With that clarity, they will all of a sudden realize what they don't understand, right? I know you've all had that kid in your class that's like, I don't get it. And then you're like, what don't you get? All of it. Like, oh, okay. All of it. Sometimes kids have a hard time identifying what it is that they don't understand. They're not sure what part of the process or what part of the learning that is going on that they really don't get. That's why learning targets are so important. So giving our students that clear goal at the end, making that really evident for them in the beginning is going to help them get to where we need them to go. And that's in every subject area, no matter what you teach. So again, learning targets typically associated with each lesson. And many of you, I know, I've been in a lot of your classrooms and I see you posting learning targets, you have them on the board, you have them somewhere on the wall. I know you're very familiar with them already. A lot of times we associate learning targets with specific lessons, right? They're kind of attached to your objective for your lesson. Today, we're going to have you think about learning targets for a unit. Those are really important because at the end of a unit or a chapter or what you're doing with your kids, you're really assessing them on what your targets were, right? So if you can provide at the beginning of a chapter, at the beginning of a unit, by the end of this is what I need you to be able to do. This is what you should know or you should be able to, what you should be able to show. If you can do that, and provide that in the beginning, as you go along, it will be easier for your students to identify what it is that they really still need help with or what it is that they have accomplished. For my special ed teachers, this is huge for your kids. It's so hard sometimes to identify where it is that you need to hone in on and focus in order to get them where they need to go. So learning targets for them and making them aware of their own learning is really important. So just a little refresher, if you're unfamiliar with learning targets, they are statements of what we want students to be able to do, and they're usually in kid-friendly language. So teaching points talk about a teacher perspective, what you will do as the instructor. Learning targets talk about what your students can do at the end. It's kind of like from their perspective. Being able to answer these questions are going to help make your instruction so much more effective. Okay. This is our next step in what we're doing. We have all of these people working on wonderful units, but let's be honest, like, this is a very diverse group, right? You have people here that are from kindergarten to 12th grade, you teach special ed, you teach all subject areas. We have the arts, we have everyone all together in the same room. So what is something that is highly effective and really relevant to every single one of you? And that's, what are you giving your kids to help them accomplish what they need? So I just want you to kind of look at these. So oftentimes with learning targets, we think of them like, okay, a task I need them to accomplish, an activity we're going to do in class. When you are thinking about learning targets for your own class, I need you to be a little more specific and mindful. So these, while they're all wonderful activities, they're not super specific. So I'm going to give you a math example. I'm sorry, most of the time I'm a math coach, so this is kind of my wheelhouse, but so your subject would be math, your topic, you're teaching decimals. The assignment that you might give the kids, page 152 in the book, that is not a learning target, it's the assignment you're giving. The activity, you're going to go on a decimal hunt with your students. Also, very appropriate activity, but not necessarily the learning target. So the target for your kids may be, I can read decimals and put them in order from least to greatest. That's what you want them to accomplish after going on that decimal hunt and doing that assignment. That's what they should be able to achieve at the end. That's what they should be able to show you. You did a lot of work with prioritizing standards based on knowledge, skills, and understanding. This kind of ties back in. We have learning targets that are also based on knowledge, skills, and understanding. It all comes full circle, it's all related. So think of that work that you did last year. You kind of already separated out. The different targets, right? Knowledge, that deals with your content, what you need your kids to master. Performance or skill targets, that's where the process, what they have to do with that knowledge and those that subject area. And then the understanding or reasoning, sometimes that's like your application, like, okay, here's the knowledge, they have to understand it to be able to do this. Those are kind of the various levels of learning targets. Sometimes you'll have multiple within a lesson. Definitely within a unit, obviously you would cover all of those areas. You need them to know things, you need to be able to do things, right, and apply. These are some examples. Now, when you go back into your work groups, we have developed a folder for you, and it was shared with you, or if you didn't get it shared through email, we have at the end on your way out, we have a one-page direction sheet that kind of tells you what your tasks are for the day. Bring you right to a Google folder. And in this folder, I put this PowerPoint, so if you want to reference these later and look at these examples to help you when you're thinking about your own learning targets, you can do that. These are examples of skill targets. I added a PE one down there. My brother's a PE teacher. The arts always get left off, right? Is there a PE teacher even in here? No, probably not. Okay. Okay, yay. And then understanding and reasoning. So, again, you can reference these kind of to help guide you in thinking about your own later. Learning targets are so important because without them, here are all of the things that we can't do. If you notice, assessment, that's key. If you know what your targets are, then it's easier to create an assessment that really covers what your students should be able to do so that you can pinpoint your next instruction. It helps you give feedback to your kids as well. Okay, so what are we doing today with our work? Okay. This is kind of the slide Mike showed you at the beginning, what we've done, where we're going. So today when you are working in your groups, the first thing you're going to be doing, and I promise you, you don't have to remember any of these specific instructions because it's all, and please forgive me on those sheets for your directions. I am not trying to be insulting. I just was really explicit to make sure that we don't have a lot of adults to come around and help you, and I know you're working on your own. I just want to make sure I'm making it easy for you to understand how to find things. So within that folder, it tells you, like, click on this, then go to this. So when you go into your folder, you're going to have the opportunity to look at what was done this summer if you're an ELA or math teacher, and use the rubric that was developed to reflect on that work, to really kind of look at the parts of a unit and get to know those. If you are not an ELA or math teacher, you'll see on there it tells you what to do, but we're asking you to look at your current curriculum, a unit that you do right now. We're asking you to use the rubric that was developed and kind of reflect on what you do. Maybe what areas in your curriculum that you feel you're really strong in based on that rubric, what areas could you maybe reflect on more and work on. We want you to have those really good conversations. You're also going to take one of your units and you're going to begin writing unit learning targets. So what do you want your students, what can they do at the end of your unit? Again, it's not lesson specific, like you don't have to go lesson by lesson. It's at the end of this chapter, at the end of this unit, what should my students be able to do? So you're going to do that, and there is a place for you to record those and submit them in that folder. The directions are very specific. This quote in the corner, it's something I really want you to focus on. If we create a culture where every teacher believes they need to improve not because they are not good enough, but because they can be even better, there's no limit to what we can achieve. I know that you are all awesome teachers. I have seen your classrooms. I know how much time and effort you put into your job, into your students, and I know how much you care. So this is about us being able to make things even better for our kids. You do a great job right now, and we appreciate everything that you do. This is a way for us to make it even better.